Kristi Gustafson Barlette with the Times Union and timesunion.com. And welcome to 20 Things Plus, where we catch up with someone previously featured on the Times Union's 20 Things You Don't Know About Me. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Ed O'Keefe. Ed is the senior White House and political correspondent with CBS News. And he's also a Delmar native and a Bethlehem High School graduate. Hi, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you again.
Yes, last time we talked was 4 years ago. And we talked about how you had one daughter at the time. I think she was just shy of 2 years old. And you and your wife were living down in Washington, right? But your family has grown since then. So what's the update there?
We have another daughter. We're still in Washington, and I have a new job.
Well, what's the coolest thing what do you love most about being a dad to daughters? I have two daughters. I think it's so fun. But from a dad standpoint, what's the best thing about a dad to daughters?
Well, I had two younger sisters. So what I'm really kind of seeing and experiencing is sort of what it must have been like for my dad, frankly, to put up with them and to learn from them. And I've seen so many characteristics of one of my other sisters in one and not in the other. So it's almost like, Amelia is more like my sister Rebecca, and Margot is more like my sister Anna, and those characteristics have not yet crossed. So it's just kind of neat watching two young girls grow up similar to my two younger sisters did.
And to watch their personalities develop, and they're at such a fun age right now. So that's just very cool. All right, and then you mentioned that you have a new job. I know that when we spoke originally, you were at the paper in the Washington Post, and you had covered Congress since 2012. Since then, you've sort of had two promotions since then, or at least a job change and then a promotion, right? So what's going on with that?
Yeah, and in many ways, I'm still covering the same subject matter, but from a slightly different way of reporting on things. I'm now with CBS News and covered the 2018 and 2020 elections, and now I'm covering the Biden administration as part of a team that keeps track of him and the vice president and everything they're up to, but also have a dual role that has me sort of thinking ahead to what's next in American politics. So in essence, it's covering the guy who lives in the White House now and covering all the people who'd like to live in the White House one day.
That's very cool. So I have a question, because I could never be a political reporter. I'd be a very bad political reporter, but I'm incredibly interested, especially in everything that goes in the White House. And I love anything on Air Force One. So I want to know, have you ridden on Air Force One as part of the press corps?
Not yet, because despite what people might think, it's actually a far more exclusive and tricky seat to get, especially these days. He travels with a very small, what we call traveling press pool, who pool their resources essentially on behalf of a lot of other organizations. And so, there's a rotation of the 5 major television networks. So we're talking today, it's CBS's day. Tomorrow, it's CNN's day. Then it's Fox. Then it goes NBC and then ABC. So we follow the alphabet. And essentially, we're on a 5-day rotation. So if you're lucky and it's your pool day and you're the one assigned at your network to travel that day, you might get to go on Air Force One. You might end up in a presidential motorcade to the other side of Washington. But ultimately, eventually, it works that pretty much everybody gets an opportunity to do that at some point. I am scheduled this week to fly on Air Force Two with the vice president. Yeah, but that's the difference between like flying economy to London and flying business class or first class to London. It's a much smaller flight.
It is, but it's still unlike anything that any other person gets to experience. And like I said, I've always been fascinated by it. And I think it's very cool. Now, you mentioned how things are much different now with travel. And I'm sure the major factor with that is because of COVID. Obviously, this has been going on for 15 months now. And I know you covered the White House for the duration of COVID, because you were there covering President Trump, and now you're covering President Biden. What is it? And then obviously you were covering it before COVID as well. How is it different to be covering the White House, besides obviously that fewer people are in the press conferences, I'm guessing? What are some of the other differences?
Yeah, and I had spent most of last year out on the campaign trail, but the few times I was at the White House versus now, it's night and day. I mean, this is an administration that takes the efforts to avoid getting COVID far more seriously or aggressively than the last guys. The basic examples of that are every time you go into the West Wing, you have to get tested for COVID, even if you've been fully vaccinated like I have. And then you get a color-coded wristband that signals that you've been tested. If you test positive, they're going to call you within 10 minutes and tell you you've got it, you got to stay away. The other difference is for now, at least inside the building, you do have to still be wearing masks, and they're pretty aggressive about that. Even the president wears them outside, despite telling everyone we don't have to, in a sign of how seriously he's trying to show the country people should be taking it. So those differences are pretty apparent. The other is that access to parts of the White House where people work and where he lives are far more restricted than they were last year as well, in order to keep everybody safe. I mean, the president, and his family have been fully vaccinated at this point, but they don't want to leave anything to chance. And so the testing is pretty aggressive, the distancing is pretty aggressive. And it means that we don't get to see face-to-face a lot of the officials that we might otherwise talk to on a regular basis, or be able to at least see in person. Many of them are still working from home. Some of them still haven't moved from Texas or California or the Carolinas. They're just working remotely for the president, and in essence, running branch offices of the West Wing far, far away from Washington, because they figure, A, I can't go into the White House, and B, it might give the administration a better sense of what it's like to have people working remotely if they're not in Washington, working from home.
Well, and you talk about them working from home, and then your next new update is about how covering this most recent election was much different than any of the other, 3 other elections you covered. I know you had mentioned earlier you were on the campaign trail for much of this, but you weren't out of your house as much as you would have been for other, right? Like the rest of us, you spent a lot of time working from home. What were some of the other differences too?
I mean, by St. Patrick's Day 2020, we basically were running campaign coverage from our kitchens and our living rooms and our bedrooms like everybody else was running their jobs. And that completely changes the nature of what it is we're doing and covering. And it makes it incredibly difficult and frustrating to get a sense of what's really going on, and what do they make of the different things that are going on in the news? How is the candidate? How's his team? What did they make of last night's debate? No, really, what did they make of last night's debate? Because when you can't look them in the eye, when you can't pull them aside, frankly, when you can't buy them a beer or lunch, because that's part of what we do sometimes, it's very difficult. And unless we had a way to hack into their Zoom meeting, we wouldn't have a good sense of what it was like. And so that made it difficult. But the most dangerous, or I think detrimental thing, was we weren't able to be out and about in the country talking to people who actually make the decision, voters. And any attempt that we would make, was stunted by the fact that we had to keep our distance, we had to wear our masks, and a lot of people just weren't out and about. And so it made having to find a way to talk to people that much more difficult. It had to be done this way. And as you know, that's not the most effective, easiest way to talk to people, because, they're putting on airs, or they're more worried about how their hair looks, or, it's harder to get a read on them. And so I think ultimately, that it made it harder, I think, to pick up on some things that ended up happening.
And that is interesting. Even no matter what your job, I think you're right with that. When we're not in person and we're not talking to people face to face, it's just different. The authenticity, it's hard for anybody to have the same authenticity when not in person, or the same honesty or transparency.
And I'll tell you, the one thing that really drove my wife kind of, well, let's say it intrigued her, was the fact that we had to convert a corner of our bedroom into my at-home studio. And, neither of us ever anticipated having studio lighting in our bedroom, but we did for a little while, because, in order to join the morning show or CBSN, sometimes evening news, we had to be able to do it from home, and it required a lot of rearranging that we weren't anticipating.
And I think we've all gotten kind of used to now just watching people report from home, because it's what's happened now for more than a year. So, well, speaking of which, obviously you're doing television now. Prior to this, and when we spoke previously, you were writing for the paper and you were blogging, and I know you had your podcast and all that kind of thing. But what is the biggest difference with writing for TV versus writing for, say, I'll call all of that print?
Yeah, well, and I don't know what we're supposed to call it anymore, since most people
I know
anyway.
Exactly. That's why it's a loose term.
Right. Newspapers are doing videos, and TV stations are writing articles. It's a whole new world. I think the biggest well, it's funny, when I talk to former colleagues I worked with in newspapers, they'll say, do you get to do any writing anymore? And I'll say, excuse me, I'm doing an arguably harder kind of writing than you are. Because if you envision the front page of the newspaper, and you know how you get a newspaper article and you get to the bottom of it and you have to jump to like page 15. Right. That's all I get. I basically get that space, if you think about it this way. And I got to pack everything important about the 1,500 word story they just wrote into about 90 seconds. And people roll their eyes and think, oh, well, that's no time at all. Well, really? Because if you look at the way we mostly watch and consume our information and our entertainment these days, many people do it in faster bites. And you've got to find a way to convey accurate, important, interesting information, set it to pictures, and get it done in about 90 seconds to 2 minutes at the most of the time. In certain formats, you and I can sit here and talk about the news, and people like that format, but that's more sort of off the cuff. But being able to write to that, 90-second time limit or so, sometimes as little as 45 seconds, it tests your ability to really cut through and know what is it that ultimately most people are going to care about. And the one thing I remember, and this is no knock on the way I do my work, no knock at all on how people consume the news, I'm fully aware of the fact that, most people as they do it are not necessarily sitting there giving you, their entire 100% attention. The kids might be running through the room. They may be brushing their teeth. They may be cooking dinner. They may be looking at their phone. And so you've also got to work on, using turns of phrase and words that catch people's attention and hold their attention a little longer. So it's almost like 3D chess versus just playing chess, because you've got to be thinking about the ears and the eyes and the head and the heart. Whereas I think often in newspapers, you're writing obviously a little differently, a little more expansively. And, and you also have to worry about keeping people's attention, but, it's easier for people to go back and read something than it is maybe to watch it.
Well, and you talk about people being distracted and their attention span. And I think that's also sometimes when people say, well, no, this is what's going on. And I heard it on the news, but they heard a half of a sentence. Right. They interpreted it wrong. And then that's one of the many ways that inaccurate information gets spread. It was reported accurately. Someone heard it incorrectly, then decided to share it on social media. And now there's this kind of wave of inaccurate information. And it really goes back to the person who's not paying attention, not the person who's reporting on it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I try to remember when we're doing this is I've been a TV viewer longer than I've been a TV journalist. And it's going to be that way for a while until I get
right, because you started this job in 2018, right? You were a correspondent in 2018, and wasn't it in January of this year that you got the promotion to fully covering the White House, and then this is your job with CBS, correct?
Yep.
Okay. I will say I remember seeing that on Twitter, and I was excited because I thought it's a hometown guy and look at all these great things he's doing, which is a chance to also mention that people should follow you on Twitter. You, not just your own content, but you share a lot of great content, with your retweets. So people can get a lot of really good information that way. But now, before I let you go, Ed, and thank you so much. Like I said, I'm very fascinated by political reporting. I love to follow it. I love to listen to it, read it, and watch it. So it's been fun to talk with you. But before I let you go, at this point in 20 Things Plus, we play a little game where we give 3 clues for who may be featured on Monday's 20 Things You Don't Know About Me. Now, I know you're from the area, but you're not in the area anymore, so that may make this a little challenging. But readers and viewers also like to guess, and they can do so by tweeting at Just Kristi, tweeting at Times Union, or commenting on this video on the Times Union's Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. So I'll give you one clue right up front, is that she's in your industry, but on a local level. So here we go. I first went to college for film production. Although I love film history, I rediscovered my passion for journalism by anchoring the school announcements at Georgia State University. That's when I decided to switch majors and transfer to the University of Georgia in Athens. I love trying new things in my stories and creative stand-ups. So far, I stood on top of the New York State Thruway cashless tolling gantries, inside a US Army tank, and in front of Air Force One. Had to pick one with Air Force One because, as I said, that's my fascination. And the third one is, I'm a proud daughter of mixed descent. My father's side is Black and my mother's side is Filipino. I love my heritage and I am humbled by my family's struggles that afforded me the opportunities I have. So she's a local journalist for a station of not a CBS station, a different station, but people can take guesses and then they can also check out timesunion.com on Monday morning starting at 7 and they will meet her and learn more about her. So thank you again, Ed, and we will continue following you.
I will say this, having also done the morning announcements back in middle school, it is very good training for this kind of work because you've got a rapt audience there that has to listen to you. And I will embarrass my sister again, as I did when I did the morning announcements back in the day, and just point out to her that, you know, that led to this. So there you go.
Did you used to read like what was being served in the cafeteria for lunch and all that
And
fun
you know,
stuff?
whatever else, you know, what other announcement had to be had. The roller skating party was being held on Friday, something like that. And it was it was the middle school principal who pulled me aside one morning and said, I need to see you in my office. And I thought, oh God, what did I do? And he goes, I just want you to know, I think you're kind of good at this and you might want to consider a career in it. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And, you know, not until later did I realize, maybe he was onto something. So here we are.
And is he still the principal at what is it, Bethlehem Middle School?
I don't think Dr. Loban is still principal of Bethlehem Central Middle School, but if he's out there and he's watching this, he was right. And thank you for the advice.
And you've done well. All right. Thank you again, Ed. I really appreciate your time.
Take care.